Imagine you're sitting in a room trying to open a door that just won't open, no matter how many times you try. You try once, twice, 5 times, and every single time you get the same answer, which is nothing. At some point, you just give up, because what's the point of trying if nothing ever works anyway? But here's where it gets weird. The next day, the door is open, wide open, and you don't even get up to check. And it's not that you're lazy or that you don't care. It's something deeper. Your brain simply decided that trying doesn't make sense, and it's sticking to that decision even when the situation changed a long time ago. Why we stop trying in school after one bad grade, why we don't reach out to someone after they rejected us once, why at some point we just give up. It's called learned helplessness, and there's a pretty good chance you've already experienced it. Nobody just never told you what it was. Sometimes the biggest prison isn't the walls. It's the belief that no matter what you do, nothing is ever going to change. It all started in 1965, when a young scientist named Martin Seligman was running what seemed to him like pretty boring experiments with dogs at the University of Pennsylvania. The setup was simple. The dogs would hear a sound, followed by a mild electric shock, and after a few repetitions they started reacting to the sound alone, as if they could already feel the pain. Classic conditioning, nothing groundbreaking. But then came the second phase, and Seligman noticed something he wasn't expecting at all. The dogs that had previously been shocked with no way to escape were now moved to a new enclosure where getting out was incredibly simple. All they had to do was jump over a low barrier on the other side. New dogs that hadn't gone through that first phase figured it out quickly and were jumping over without hesitation after just a few tries. But the ones that had been shocked and couldn't do anything about it behaved completely differently. They would stand up, walk around the enclosure for a moment, then lie back down on the floor and just wait for the pain to pass. The barrier was low, the path was clear, nobody was stopping them. But they had learned something worse than the pain itself. They had learned that no matter what they do, nothing is ever going to change. It was 2 years later, in 1967, when Seligman and Stephen Meyer designed an experiment that was meant to prove this in a way that couldn't be ignored. They split the dogs into 3 groups. The first one got shocked, but could stop it by pressing a lever with their nose, which gave them a sense of control over what was happening to them. The second group got exactly the same shocks at exactly the same moments, but their lever was a fake. No matter what they did, the shock kept coming, and absolutely nothing they did made any difference. Then all the groups were moved to a new enclosure with a barrier and an electrified floor, where the way out was right there for anyone who simply decided to jump. The dogs from the first and third group figured it out fast and were jumping after just a few tries. The dogs from the second group laid down on the floor and waited, even though the way out was in exactly the same place as it was for everyone else. Seligman wrote later that it was one of the hardest things he had ever seen in his entire scientific career. And not because the dogs were suffering, but because they could see the way out and didn't move toward it. That's how learned helplessness was born. A mechanism that makes a healthy, capable living being stop trying, not because it's weak, but because its brain came to one very logical, very quiet, and very devastating conclusion. Whatever I do, it's not going to make a difference. Seligman didn't stop at dogs. And in the experiments that followed, he tested whether the same mechanism works in humans. And it worked in exactly the same way. Simply sat in the noise when moved to a new room with a button that actually worked, and didn't even try to turn it off. They carried the helplessness from one situation into a completely different one, like they packed it in their bag without even knowing it was there. And this is where it gets really uncomfortable, because learned helplessness doesn't need a laboratory or an experiment to work. You learn it when you put real effort into something at school and still get a bad grade, and someone tells you that you just don't have a talent for it. You learn it when you try to say something important at home and nobody reacts like you said anything at all. You learn it when you care about someone, you give everything you have, and you still hear that it's not enough. And one day you just stop trying. Not because you're weak or because you don't care, but because your brain has been through hundreds of moments like that and came to a very logical conclusion. There's no point. And what's most frustrating about this, the pattern doesn't go away on its own, even when things change. New teacher, new class, new friends. And you still don't walk up to the door because you didn't learn this helplessness here, you learned it somewhere else, and you brought it with you. But Seligman discovered one more thing he completely didn't expect. And this part matters more than the entire experiment. When he tried to reverse learned helplessness in the dogs, none of the obvious methods worked. Not encouragement, not rewards, not waiting for them to figure it out on their own. Only one thing worked. The experimenters physically took the dogs by their paws and guided them through the motion of escaping over and over again. No shock, no pain. Just the experience of moving in the right direction. And after a few sessions like that, the dogs started jumping on their own. Not because someone explained to them that they could, but because they felt it in their bodies. Seligman spent over 30 years on this research and reached a conclusion that sounds simple, but is hard to actually apply. Learned helplessness isn't cured by words or motivational quotes, it's cured by small wins. Specific moments where something you do actually has an effect and your brain starts updating its conclusion. Let's go back to the room from the beginning, because the door is open and you're standing on the other side. Is there something in your life you stopped walking up to? Not because you genuinely can't, but because for a long time you couldn't, and you just got used to the idea that that's how it is. Maybe that barrier doesn't exist anymore, and the only thing blocking the move is the memory of pain that happened somewhere completely different a long time ago. Your brain learns helplessness through repetition, but it learns agency exactly the same way. One small move, one real effect, one more time. Sometimes the biggest prison isn't the walls. It's the belief that there's no point in trying. But beliefs can change, and your brain is really good at that if you give it a reason.